Good afternoon. This is your trauma grandma coming to you from the other side. Today's topic will almost definitely be elaborated on later, but we're going to start out with some basic framework. Mind you that many people have different ways to get to this end. This is just the one that the trauma grandma has found to work the best. Whether you call it a journey, recovery, a healing adventure, there's one question on everyone's lips. How do I get over it? Chris proposes a three-pronged plan. Don't think of them as different stops along the track so much as sunlight, soil, and water for plant growth. Meaning you aren't going to do A and then B and then C, but rather a different mix of all three at different times, depending on what you need. Our soil is self-care. While self-care has become semi-synonymous with self-soothing, depending on your neck of the woods, it's a lot more complicated than just doing something nice for yourself when you get upset. Self-care can be divided up in many ways, but the most useful in this situation goes as follows: preventative, reactive, and maintenance. Preventative self-care is what you do when you know you're going to be doing something that's stressful. It's the prep work that gets done to make sure that the process is as painless as possible. It's like throwing salt in your driveway when you know it might snow. It won't solve your whole problem, but it can definitely help. Reactive self-care is what you do after you've become triggered or gotten to a bad spot. This is your self-soothing, your grounding skills, your venting to a friend, that sort of thing. Maintenance self-care is what keeps the engine running. You aren't doing it because a tragedy is about to strike. You're not doing it because you're upset. You're doing it because you deserve to feel okay. Creating self-care plans for all three of the above situations is such an important thing for this healing process. Self-care is empowering. It's about recognizing what we can control. It's about seeing what we can do for ourselves. Following the plant metaphor, sunlight is symptom management. This piece of the puzzle is a bit more complicated than self-care is. The first thing that Chris advises doing is writing down the various symptoms in your life. Don't spend too much time trying to figure out if this is something that is necessarily a trauma symptom or if it's a mental illness thing. You don't need to worry about that just yet. Just, what are the things that are causing me grief? What are negative things that happen when I get upset? What is preventing me from making the motions that I need to be making? Now, one of the biggest issues that people run into, whether they be trauma survivors, mentally ill individuals, or just anyone facing a large problem, is that they refuse to break things down. They can't see the progress that they're making because they're focusing on the big picture and on the spaces that aren't coming along, rather than trying to see when something is working. Which is why the next step is to select one or two of these symptoms, just one or two. You can look back at the other ones later. The ones you've picked out for the next few weeks are the only ones you're going to focus on. Record when they happen, record how bad they get, record what you do to help alleviate them, and record how effective the attempt is for that single symptom. Too often we want big single fixes when the truth is, this healing adventure is filled with a lot more plus ones in terms of mental help than it is filled with plus hundreds. Once you've singled out a few things to focus on, your next job is to start researching these symptoms. Google them, talk to other people who struggle with similar issues, read books, or listen to podcasts. Wherever you think you might be able to get some information, go ahead and look it up. Write down all the ones you don't immediately scoff at. There's no point in trying something that you've already decided doesn't work. It could be a miracle drug, and framing would still mean that it'd be next to worthless. Spend a couple of weeks trying different things out. Make sure to try them out a handful of times and watch out for even minute changes. I know it can be frustrating, but all of those plus ones, they add up. It's way more likely that you'll reach 100 with a bunch of ones and the occasional 5 or 10 than it is that you'll stumble on one or two things that'll solve the problem entirely. If you need to break it down further, pick 3 coping skills to try each week and then move on to the next set if none of the previous ones worked out. Once you've found a couple of plus ones, you'll be able to layer them and then move on to the next set of symptoms. The final piece of the puzzle, the watering, well, that's processing. Processing the trauma that happened, processing the effect that it had on your life, processing the way that it changed your relationships and worldview. The most important thing I can tell you about processing is to remember to have self-care planned out beforehand. Processing is hard and painful and often leaves you feeling worse at first. Experiment with different styles of processing. Drawing, talking it out, reading about similar traumas, listening to yourself talking about what happened, doing artwork or poetry or creating playlists, whatever it is that works for you. Involve different senses and ways of doing things. The brain doesn't only work in one way, and engaging as many different parts of the brain as possible increases the depth at which we process, and as such, the more that we have integrated trauma into our narrative, which allows us to go about our day-to-day lives in a much more functional manner. Know that you can start anywhere you need to. Most people don't start with what happened, but the way that it made them feel, with the way that it hurt them, with the way that people around them have complicated the wound. To wrap things up, it's important to remember that everyone's healing adventure is different. We all heal at different rates and in different ways, and shaming yourself for the progress you aren't making only makes it harder for you to convince yourself to keep fighting. The motions you're making are worthwhile, I promise. That's it for today. If you like this video, please like it below, and if you didn't and wouldn't mind giving criticism, I'd love to hear about the ways that we can improve.